The Last of Us zombies. What most people call zombies are actually living humans overtaken by the cordyceps brain infection, a mutated strain of the rearward fungus Ophiocordyceps. Once spores or a bite introduce the pathogen, it hijacks the host nervous system in hours, flooding the brain with mycelium that drives the victim into a murderous rage while keeping basic motor functions intact. And because the infected are still technically alive, their bodies don't rot away like classic undead, giving them a longer, operational lifespan and the stamina of a living predator. And as the fungus spreads, the host physiology and behavior change in distinct stages. Freshly churned runners retain human speed and agility, swarming prey in packs, and within weeks, fungal plates erupt under the skin, muting cognition and creating stalkers that skulk in shadows, using unsettling clicks to echolocate. Months to years later, the infection fully armors the skull, blinding the host and birthing the iconic clickers, whose faces are entirely overtaken by the fungus, rendering them blind but giving them heightened echolocation abilities. Rarer years-old cases become bloaters or shamblers, hulking brutes shattered in hardened fungus that can hurl spore-filled sacks or emit corrosive clouds, making close combat almost suicidal. And in the deepest quarantine-free zones, horrific abominations such as the Rat King show how multiple long-term hosts can fuse into a single colossal monster. And beyond individual variants, the fungus can even spread across entire environments, connecting infected through a network of tendrils, meaning disturbing one dormant creature might awaken many. And spores lingering in enclosed spaces turn abandoned subways and basements into invisible minefields, forcing survivors to weigh every bullet against the risk of a single inhalation. World War Z zombies. The zombie plague, often called Solanum in expanded lore, begins as a mysterious viral outbreak that reanimates the dead within minutes of a bite. The infection halts decomposition, floods the victim's system with adrenaline-like compounds, and overrides higher brain functions, leaving only a primal drive to feed and spread the virus. And because transmission is almost instantaneous, and any mammal with sufficient body mass can reanimate, the contagion races across continents before governments grasp its scope, turning routine medical emergencies and panicked evacuations into cascading flashpoints of chaos. Max Brooks' original novel portrays these zombies as classic Romero-style shamblers, slow, silent, and relentless. And their menace comes from overwhelming numbers and the fact that they don't tire, feel pain, or drown. They simply accumulate at choke points, like bridges, fences, and rooftops, until weight and persistence bring defenses down. And the 2013 film adaptation amplifies the threat by making the infected hyperfast and hive-like, and these sprinting zombies swarm en masse, forming raging anthills that let them scale walls or topple barricades in seconds. The Walking Dead zombies. The undead, usually called walkers, aren't spread by a single bite-borne pathogen the way many pop culture zombies are. Instead, every living human already carries the mysterious infection. When someone dies from any cause, they reanimate unless the brain is destroyed. A walker's bite is still lethal, but only because the wound becomes septic or hemorrhagic and kills the victim, after which they inevitably turn. Reanimation can take as little as a minute or as long as several hours. Physically, walkers are slow, uncoordinated, and driven solely by basic sensory cues, mostly sound and to a lesser extent sight and smell. They have no need to breathe or rest, so they claw at barriers until limbs shear off or bones break. Destroying the brain with a headshot, a skull crush, or blade through the temple is the only sure way to stop them. And although one walker is manageable, the real danger lies in numbers and herd behavior. Gunfire or shouting can draw dozens, then hundreds, into migrating masses that sweep across open ground like a tidal wave. And survivors sometimes mask themselves in walker guts or blood to fool that primitive sense of smell. And over time the series shows walkers decaying, skeletal jaws, missing limbs, or liquefied organs, yet still functional. And later seasons and spin-offs introduce rare variant walkers that can climb, open doors, or even sprint for short bursts, hinting the pathogen may be mutating. Train to Busan. The outbreak begins with a secret chemical leak at a biotech facility, but the film never dwells on the exact science. What matters is speed. Victims turn in under a minute, their bodies snapping and contorting as the virus hijacks their nervous system. And because the infection spreads through bites and blood spray, any cramped environment, like say a train, becomes a pressure cooker where one misstep snowballs into a full car massacre. Physically, these zombies are pure kinetic terror. They sprint, hurl themselves through windows, and contort their limbs in ways that feel both insect-like and disturbingly human. And their senses are sight and sound-based. Once they lose visual contact, such as when a door is shut or a tunnel plunges the train into darkness, they mill around confused, giving survivors slim windows to sneak past. In daylight though, they are relentless, piling over each other in narrow aisles or dogpiling on doors until metal groans and glass gives away. And beyond the visceral action set pieces, Train to Busan uses its zombies to turn a symbol of modern convenience, the high-speed KTX line, into a claustrophobic gauntlet, and the undead force passengers to confront social hierarchies and moral choices. Who gets barricaded out, who gets rescued, and who's deemed expendable. The 28 Days Later zombies. The threat isn't the undead at all. It's living people hijacked by the rage virus, an engineered strain of monkey-borne, hemorrhagic fever that amplifies aggression to the point of mindless savagery. Transmission is brutally fast. A droplet of blood or saliva in the eye, or an open cut, can turn a victim in as little as 10 or 20 seconds. And because the infected are still alive, their heart pumps, their muscles work at full capacity, and they don't decompose, giving them stamina and strength far beyond Romero-style zombies. Physically, rage victims sprint, climb, and hurl themselves through glass or fire with zero self-preservation, propelled by a constant adrenal surge. Their eyes flood with blood, their veins darken, and they communicate only through guttural screams. And lacking higher cognition, they don't use tools or strategize, but their sheer speed and pack mentality let them overwhelm police lines, military cordons, and fortified safe houses within minutes. And even a single infected loose in a crowded space can snowball into a citywide collapse before authorities have time to quarantine an area. Narratively, the rage virus reframes the zombie genre around contagion, speed, and moral panic, rather than the slow creep of the undead. And the films drive home that civilization's thin veneer shatters faster than the virus spreads. Military units turn on refugees, families are torn apart in seconds, and ethical lines blur under constant fear. Resident Evil zombies. They originate from the Chi virus, a mutagenic pathogen engineered by the Umbrella Corporation as a military bioweapon. The virus reanimates the tissue, jumpstarts metabolic processes, and overrides higher brain functions, leaving hosts with the urge to feed. A single bite or exposure to contaminated fluids can turn a healthy person into a shuffling corpse in minutes, and airborne leaks such as the infamous Raccoon City outbreak can spiral into full-scale pandemics before containment teams mobilize. Early games and the 2002 film spotlight these classic Romero-style shamblers, but even the slow ones are deceptively sturdy. Unless their brains or spinal cords are destroyed, they'll crawl and claw until every bullet or mashed swing counts. What makes the franchise uniquely terrifying is Umbrella's habit of iterating on its own disaster. Variants like the G virus, C virus, Las Plagas parasite, and mold fungus spawn an entire bestiary of bioorganic weapons. Some remain vaguely zombie-ish, like the Ganados in Resident Evil 4 or Javo in Resident Evil 6, while others mutate into towering tyrants, nemesis pursuers, or spidery lickers with exposed brains and lethal tongues. And these creatures often retain rudimentary intelligence or are outright programmed to wield weapons, stalk specific targets, or shrug off small arms fire, forcing protagonists to scrounge for acid rounds, magnum ammo, or environmental hazards just to survive. Every new viral strain represents an arms race escalation, turning once safe laboratories, police stations, and villages into mazes of ethical failure. And the zombies themselves become environmental puzzles, blockades to reroute, threats to freeze or burn, or timed obstacles that pressure resource management. Left 4 Dead zombies. The threat is the green flu, a fast-acting rabies-like virus that hijacks a victim's adrenal system, wipes out higher reasoning, and leaves only an animal urge to attack the uninfected. They can sprint, climb, and swarm, and they turn within minutes of exposure to bites or contaminated fluids. Once infected populations reach critical mass, they form stampeding hordes that home in on noise or bright light, turning a single gunshot or car alarm into an instant death sentence for the 4 survivors trying to cross and overrun America. The series' signature terror comes from its special infected, each a different mutation of the green flu. The original game introduces the Boomer, a bile-bloated exploder whose vomits blind survivors and summons hordes. There's also the Smoker, a lanky ambusher that reels victims in with a prehensile tongue, the Hunter, a hooded pouncer that pins prey beneath razor claws, the Colossal Tank, a concrete hurling juggernaut, and the eerily passive yet one-shot Deadly Witch. Left 4 Dead 2 adds the Charger, a half-tank battering ram, the Spitter, an acid-spewing area denial unit, and Jockey, a Coquelin rider that steers survivors into hazards. And what makes these infected uniquely oppressive is the game's AI director, which monitors the team's stress, ammo, and pace, then dynamically spawns commons, specials, and witches to keep tension high. No two runs feel the same. 1 minute you're sprinting through an empty alley, the next you're blind with bile, while a tank barrels in. And this orchestration turns the green flu horde into a living, adaptive environment. Less a scripted obstacle than a relentless stress test of communication and composure. Dying Light Zombies. The Harn virus is a mutated rabies, and this influenza hybrid sweeps through the quarantine city of Harran after an ill-fated global athletic event. Infection begins with a bite or exposure to contaminated blood, triggering fever, delirium, and within hours to days, complete loss of higher brain function. Survivors stave off the change by injecting antizin, a scarce antiviral that slows but never cures the pathogen. Once the drug wears off or the host dies, the virus takes over and reanimates the body. And because every inhabitant is already infected, any fatal wound, even a misstep of a rooftop, can add another corpse to the streets. And the virus produces several cases of infected that evolve with time of day. By daylight, the city teems with biters, decaying Romero-style shamblers that lunge in groups, and the fresher hyper-agile virals who still have enough muscle control to sprint and climb. Chemical spills and prolonged exposure spawn hulking goons, tank-like demolishers, and explosive bombers, each forcing different parkour or combat tactics. And when the sun sets, UV radiation fades, and the apex predators emerge. Volatiles, blade-jawed nightmares that sprint faster than any human and shred armor in seconds. Only UV flares, trap lights, or dawn's first rays make them retreat, turning night runs into white-knuckle tests of nerve and navigation. Narratively, the infected amplify Dying Light's score loop of risk versus reward. Daytime offers scavenging opportunities but dwindling supplies, and nighttime promises double XP and rare loot at the cost of lethal pursuers and limited visibility. And the virus is thus more than a backdrop. It's a living clock that pressures every decision, from whether to sprint across rooftops for a supply drop to how long to linger in a darkened tunnel before the volatiles catch your scent.